I was somewhere over the Atlantic when my phone lit up with a message from my daughter. She said, "Dad, she's engaged. The wedding's in April." I read it twice. Then I put the phone face down on the tray table and looked out the window at nothing but cloud. I wasn't angry. That surprised me more than anything. I'm 63 years old. I was born in Sudbury, Ontario, the son of a miner and a school secretary who made every dollar stretch like it was elastic. I grew up understanding that you worked hard, you kept your word, and you didn't walk away from things when they got difficult. That last one cost me about 20 years more than it should have. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is that for 31 years I was married to a woman I'll call my ex-wife, and for most of those years I believed I was the problem. She had a gift for that, making you the problem. We met in our early 30s at a fundraiser in Halifax. She was working in real estate staging, what she called making spaces feel inevitable. She was funny, she was sharp, and she made me feel for the first time in my adult life like I was interesting. I was a structural engineer. I was not, by any objective measure, a fascinating person at a party. But she laughed at things I said and remembered details about my family and asked follow-up questions 3 weeks later, and I mistook all of that for love. Maybe it was at the start. I'm not qualified to say anymore. We had 2 children. Our son is 30 now. Our daughter is 27. They grew up in a house in Lower Sackville, just outside Halifax, that we bought in 2001 for just under $300,000. Over the years, we renovated, maintained, paid down the mortgage steadily. By 2022, it was worth somewhere around $850,000. Equity we'd built together. Money we'd talked about using for retirement. Maybe a smaller place in Nova Scotia. Maybe something near the grandchildren when they came. I want you to hold that number in your mind. $850,000. The marriage had been declining for years before either of us said anything out loud. That's the thing nobody tells you about long marriages. They don't end dramatically. They thin out, like ice in March. One day you're walking across something solid, and the next you're just managing your weight very carefully, trying not to go through. She started spending more time in the city. She had a client base in downtown Halifax, a few developers, some higher-end residential flips, and she said the commute was killing her. She started staying over at her sister's place on nights when she had early meetings. I didn't question it. I was working on a bridge expansion project in Cape Breton and was barely home myself. Looking back, the signs were there the way signs always are. Obvious only after you know what you were looking for. There was a man, I'll call him the fiancé. He was a commercial real estate broker, somewhere in his mid-50s, twice divorced, with a reputation in certain Halifax circles for doing well and living loudly. She'd known him professionally for years. I'd met him twice at industry events and found him the kind of man who stands slightly too close when he talks to you. Like personal space is something that applies to other people. But I'm not telling this story to talk about him. In January of 2023, my ex-wife sat down across from me at our kitchen table and told me she wanted a divorce. She said she wasn't happy. She said she hadn't been happy for a long time. She said she needed to live her life fully, and she hoped I could understand that. I sat there for a long time without speaking. Then I said, "Okay." She looked surprised. Maybe she'd expected a fight. Maybe part of her wanted one. I didn't have one in me. The separation was, by Canadian standards, relatively civil. We used a mediator. We agreed on the division of assets in principle. The house would be sold, proceeds split. Each of us would retain our own RRSPs, and the pension I'd accrued through my engineering firm would be evaluated and offset against her business assets. It wasn't perfect, but it was fair. We signed a separation agreement in March. My son took her side without hesitation. He'd always been closer to her. He told me, shortly after the separation was announced, that he thought I'd never really been present in the marriage, that I'd prioritized my career, that I'd been emotionally unavailable. He wasn't entirely wrong, but he wasn't entirely right either, and he said it with a certainty that belonged to someone who'd only heard one version. There's a particular loneliness to being judged by your child. It doesn't go away quickly. My daughter was quieter about it. She told me she loved me, that she was sorry, that she hoped we'd both find some peace. She called every Sunday. I held on to those Sunday calls like a rope. By the summer of 2023, I had made a decision that most people in my life thought was a midlife crisis. I took early retirement from the engineering firm. I'd been there 22 years, and the buyout package was reasonable, and I started looking at options for leaving, not running away. I want to be clear about that, because I've thought about it a lot since. There's a difference between running away from something and choosing to move towards something else. I was 61 years old. My kids were grown. I had no mortgage, no fixed obligations, and a genuine curiosity about whether there was a version of my life I actually wanted to live, rather than one I'd simply ended up in. I had a friend from university, a man I'll call my old friend, who'd retired to Portugal 3 years earlier and would not stop sending me photographs of his lunch, tiles, pastries, the light in the late afternoon. He was insufferable about it. He was also clearly happy. I visited him in Lisbon in September 2023. I stayed for 3 weeks. I want to tell you what happened to me there, but I'm not sure I have the language for it. It wasn't dramatic. Nothing clicked into place. I just walked a lot, ate well, slept without waking at 3 a.m., and one morning sat outside a cafe near the Alfama with a coffee, and felt, for the first time in a decade, entirely unbothered. That was it. That was the whole revelation, being unbothered. I went back to Halifax. I listed my rental apartment. I started the process of getting a D7 passive income visa. By February 2024, I was living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Lisbon on a monthly budget of roughly 3,400 Canadian dollars, which covered rent, food, utilities, transport, and the occasional bottle of wine from a region I was still learning to pronounce. My ex-wife found this hilarious, apparently. My son told me she'd said I was having a breakdown. I was in a city I loved, learning a language badly, sleeping 8 hours a night, and walking 4 kilometers before breakfast every morning. If that's a breakdown, I should have had one sooner. Then came my daughter's message about the engagement, April wedding, the fiancé. I put the phone down and finished my coffee. What I did next, I don't regret, but I want to explain why I did it, because the reason matters. My daughter had mentioned, almost in passing, a few weeks earlier, that she was uncertain about something. She said our family home in Lower Sackville had already been listed for sale. This surprised me because under the terms of our separation agreement, the house was supposed to go to market by mutual agreement, with proceeds split 50-50 after outstanding costs. I had not agreed to list it. I had not been consulted. I called my lawyer in Halifax. It took her 3 days to get the full picture. My ex-wife had removed my name from the property. This had been done through a procedural mechanism that my lawyer described, with careful professional language, as not something that should have been possible given the existing separation agreement. She was looking into it. There were questions about whether a clerical error had been exploited or something more deliberate. The house had been listed in September 2023. It sold in November 2023 for $890,000. She had collected the full proceeds. I had received nothing. I will not tell you how I felt in the moment my lawyer read those numbers to me over the phone. I will only say that I sat down on the floor of my Lisbon apartment and stayed there for a while. This wasn't anger, exactly. It was something more like vertigo. The particular dizziness of realizing the ground you thought you were standing on was never there. My legal process in Canada is ongoing, and I won't discuss it in detail here, because my lawyer has specifically asked me not to. What I can tell you is that the separation agreement we signed in March 2023 is a binding legal document. What I can tell you is that Canadian family law has mechanisms for exactly this kind of situation. And what I can tell you is that when you build 30 years of equity with someone and they take all of it, and you find out while standing in a kitchen in a foreign country, something in you changes permanently. I called my son. I told him what I'd found out. There was a long silence. Then he said, "Are you sure?" "My lawyer has the records," I said. Another silence. "She told me you agreed to an early sale," he said. "She said you'd been difficult about the timeline." I didn't argue. I just said, "I think you should ask her directly. I think you should ask her to show you the documentation." He said he would. He didn't call me back that week. April came. The wedding was in Dartmouth, at a venue on the waterfront. My son was the best man. My daughter attended but told me later she'd felt sick the entire day. I was in Lisbon. I had been invited to nothing, which suited me fine. My daughter texted me that morning. She said she was thinking of me. I told her I was going for a long walk along the river, and then having lunch with my old friend and his wife, and that she shouldn't worry about me at all. That was true. I was fine. What I've learned about grief, real grief, is that it doesn't peak at the dramatic moments. It peaks on a random Tuesday when you're making eggs and a song comes on the radio. The wedding was a calendar date. I had no particular feelings about calendar dates by then. She called me that evening, my daughter. It was late for her, which was how I knew something had happened. She was crying a little, but not the way people cry when they're devastated. The way they cry when something has finally, irrevocably settled. She said, "Dad, I have to tell you what happened." There had been a guest at the wedding. An older woman, a former colleague of my ex-wife's from her earlier days in real estate. Someone who'd been around the industry for decades and knew a great many people, and apparently a great many things. During the reception, after the speeches, this woman had found herself in a conversation with my son. She'd asked him, pleasantly, whether he'd had any luck finding a place to buy. She knew he and his partner had been looking in the Halifax market for a while. He'd said it was difficult. The market was rough. He wished he'd had a bit of help with a down payment, but you know how it goes. The woman had looked at him with an expression my daughter described as like she'd just stepped in something. She said, "Well, didn't your mother's sale last year give you both something toward that?" My son had said, "What sale?" And the woman had said, "The Lower Sackville house. It went for nearly $900,000. Your mother must have done very well from that." The conversation had ended shortly after. My son went and found his mother on the dance floor. My daughter was close enough to watch it happen, but not close enough to hear the words. She said she didn't need to hear them. She said she watched her mother's face go from festive to something else entirely. Not guilt, she said, more like the look of someone who's been playing a game and has just realized the board is no longer set the way they arranged it. The reception ended earlier than planned. My son called me 2 days later. It was the longest conversation we'd had in almost 2 years. He didn't apologize right away. He's not built that way, and honestly, neither am I. We talked around it for a while, how he was doing, how the job was going, whether I liked Lisbon, and then he said quietly, "I think I've been unfair to you." I said, "You had one version of things." He said, "She told me a lot of things about you." I said, "I know." He said, "Were any of them true?" I thought about that for a moment. "Some of them, probably," I said. "I wasn't a perfect husband. I worked too much. I could have been more present. But the story of a marriage is never just one person's story." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She kept the money." "Yes," I said, "she did. All of it. All of it." He was quiet again for a long time. I let him be quiet. I didn't fill the silence with anything, because there wasn't anything to fill it with. Some things you just have to sit with. Eventually, he said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "My lawyer is handling it. I'm going to trust the process and keep living my life." "Here," he said, "in Portugal?" "For now," I said. "Maybe for a long time. I genuinely don't know. I like it here." He said, "I want to come visit." I said, "I'll make up the spare room." That was 6 months ago now. My legal matter is moving the way legal matters move. Slowly, expensively, with a lot of waiting. My lawyer is good. The documentation is clear. I am not in a hurry, because I've learned that patience and passivity are not the same thing. You can wait with your eyes open. My son came to Lisbon in September. He stayed for 10 days. We walked a lot. We talked a lot. We didn't resolve everything. That will take years, maybe, but we started. We ate a lot of grilled fish and drank a lot of wine. And one evening sat on a rooftop watching the sun go down over the Tagus, and he said without looking at me, "This is a good place, Dad." I said, "It really is." My daughter calls every Sunday, same as always. She's thinking about visiting in the spring. She says she wants to see the tiles. My ex-wife and the fiancé are, as far as I know, married and settled in Halifax. I don't follow it closely. I don't need to. I want to say something to anyone who's listening to this and recognizes something of themselves in it. Not as advice. I'm an engineer, not a counselor. But just as something I've worked out for myself. When I was younger, I believed that enduring things was a form of strength. Staying, absorbing, not making a fuss. My father was that way. His father before him, you didn't complain, you didn't leave, you kept your head down and you kept going. What I know now, at 63, standing on the other side of all of it, is that there is a difference between strength and stubbornness, and there is a difference between loyalty and erasure. I stayed in that marriage long after I should have asked harder questions, not just about her, but about what I wanted, what I needed, whether the version of myself I was presenting every day was real. I spent 30 years trying to be enough for someone who had already decided I wasn't. That's not a marriage. That's a very long audition. I'm not bitter about it. Bitterness is a choice, and I've made other choices. But I am clear about it now in a way I wasn't before, and that clarity, even when it cost me, and it cost me a great deal, feels more valuable than the comfort of not knowing. My old friend laughed when I told him the whole story. Not cruelly, just with the recognition of someone who's been through his own version of it. He said, "You know what the worst part is? You probably would have stayed forever if she hadn't left first." I thought about that for a long time. He's right. I probably would have. Some mornings I get up before the light changes and walk down to the waterfront and stand there for a while watching the river move. It's not dramatic. Nothing about my life here is dramatic. That's the point. I am, for the first time in a very long time, living a life that is entirely mine. It turns out that's the only life worth living. There's a version of this story where I'm the victim, where the whole thing is about what was taken from me. The money, the house, the years, the son who looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't enough. That version is accurate, as far as it goes. The numbers are real. The loss is real. But I've found that staying inside that version of the story has a cost, and the cost is your own life. What I keep coming back to is this: the people who deceive us can only take what we leave unguarded. Not because we're foolish. I'm not interested in blaming myself for trusting someone I'd built a life with, but because there's a kind of wisdom that only arrives after the fact. You learn to read the documents. You learn to ask the questions that feel uncomfortable. You learn that love and due diligence are not opposites. That second one took me 61 years. I'm not proud of how long it took, but I'm grateful I got there. My son is a good man who was handed a false map. He navigated by it faithfully because he trusted the person who gave it to him. I understand that. I was that person once, navigating by someone else's version of reality, believing what I was told because the alternative was too destabilizing to sit with. What strikes me now is that the moment he asked his mother to show him the documentation, something shifted in him. Not just about the money, about how he moves through the world, about the difference between loyalty and credulity. That shift, choosing to verify rather than simply believe, is one of the more important things a person can develop. It doesn't come naturally. It has to be earned, usually through getting it wrong first. My daughter never lost her footing through any of this. She held on to her own judgment quietly, without making a performance of it. She called every Sunday. She didn't take sides loudly. She just kept showing up with honesty and steadiness, and when things eventually clarified themselves, she didn't say, "I told you so." That kind of quiet persistence, doing the right thing without an audience, without reward, over a long stretch of time, is the rarest thing I know. I think about it often. As for me, I spent 30 years confusing endurance with integrity. Staying became its own kind of identity. I was the man who didn't leave, who didn't complain, who absorbed things and kept going. I told myself that was strength. What I understand now is that real strength includes the ability to ask hard questions of yourself, not just of the people around you. It means being honest about what you want, what you value, what you're willing to accept. It means not waiting until the ground disappears under you before you decide to move. The money matters. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't. But the more lasting thing, the thing I carried out of all of it, is a clarity about my own life that I genuinely did not have before. I know what I want my days to look like. I know what kind of person I'm trying to be. I know for the first time in a very long time that the life I'm living is actually mine. That's not nothing. At 63, standing at a waterfront on the other side of the Atlantic, that's about everything.